The wind howls across a barren plain, where once it said 1,000 ships set sail to rescue a stolen queen. Beneath layers of ancient dust, somewhere in the ruins of modern-day Turkey, lies the ghost of a city whispered about for over 3,000 years, a city built on power, betrayal, and blood. But what if Troy, the legendary city sung by poets and worshipped by warriors, was more than just myth? What if the truth behind the Trojan War wasn't what we've been told for centuries? Tonight we peel back the veil of legend to separate history from heroism and uncover the chilling possibility that the story of Troy hides something far darker and far more human than we could ever imagine. The story begins not with a sword, but with a poem, an ancient Greek epic, the Iliad, written by a man named Homer nearly 2,800 years ago. It tells of a decade-long war between the kingdoms of Greece and Troy, sparked by the abduction of a queen named Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus became immortal through these verses, their bravery, rage, and deaths carved into the fabric of Western civilization. But for centuries, historians dismissed the Iliad as nothing more than myth, a story told around fires to entertain and inspire. That is, until one man, a treasure hunter named Heinrich Schliemann, claimed to have found the lost city in the late 19th century. What he uncovered beneath the earth would ignite a mystery that still haunts archaeologists today. Because if Schliemann was right, then everything we thought was legend might have actually happened. Before we dive deeper into the secrets buried beneath Troy's ruins, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because in the world of ancient legends, the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. The late 1800s marked the dawn of a new obsession, one that would blur the line between history and mythology forever. A self-taught archaeologist, or as many preferred to call him, a dreamer named Heinrich Schliemann, stood on the barren hill of Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey. The land was dry, the wind relentless, and the ruins silent, but Schliemann believed that beneath his feet lay the remains of a city sung about for millennia, the city of Troy. To most scholars of his time, the idea was absurd. For centuries, Troy had existed only in poetry, in Homer's Iliad, a story of gods, kings, and wars waged over love. Historians dismissed it as legend, the work of imagination rather than fact. But to Schliemann, Homer's verses weren't just tales. They were coordinates, a coded map guiding him to the truth buried beneath centuries of disbelief. From his youth, Schliemann had been consumed by the idea that myths hid fragments of reality. He wasn't trained in archaeology, but his passion for discovery burned with a fanatic's intensity. He read the Iliad not as literature but as testimony. Every river mentioned, every direction described, every gate named, he treated them as clues left behind by an eyewitness. If Homer spoke of Troy, he said, then Troy existed. And with that conviction, he began to dig. Hisarlik didn't look like much, a mound of earth rising from the plains near the Aegean coast. Farmers passed by daily, unaware that they were treading over layers of forgotten civilizations. Schliemann hired local laborers and began excavating with crude tools, tearing through the soil with an urgency that alarmed even those who supported him. He wasn't just searching for a city. He was searching for validation, a way to prove the scholars wrong and make himself immortal in history. And as the weeks turned into months, the ground began to yield its secrets. Stone walls emerged from the earth, massive and thick, stretching across what appeared to be a fortified city. Broken pottery, fragments of weapons, and traces of fire-blackened stone hinted at destruction. Schliemann was convinced that he had found it, the real Troy. His excitement reached a fever pitch when his workers uncovered a cache of gold jewelry, diadems, and intricately designed artifacts. He declared it Priam's treasure, named after the king of Troy from Homer's tale. To immortalize the discovery, he photographed his wife, Sophia, wearing the gold, claiming she was draped in the jewels of Helen herself, the woman whose beauty had sparked a war. The world was stunned. Newspapers across Europe and America exploded with headlines. After thousands of years of debate, someone had found the city of legend. The mythical world of the Iliad had come to life, but not everyone celebrated. Behind the glory and spectacle, whispers began to surface. Scholars questioned the authenticity of his methods and the legitimacy of his findings. For one, Schliemann was known to embellish his discoveries, sometimes blurring the boundaries between fact and fiction, ironically, just like the poets he admired. His digging methods were reckless. In his haste to reach what he believed was Homer's Troy, he had destroyed upper layers of the site, erasing centuries of archaeological context. What he uncovered might have been real, but the question was, real what? Was it truly the city of Priam, or a much older settlement that existed long before the time of Homer's story? As investigations continued, it became clear that the hill of Hizarlik wasn't the site of a single city. It was a palimpsest of human civilization, 9 distinct cities built one atop another over thousands of years. Each layer bore the marks of triumph and destruction, walls built, burned, rebuilt, and burned again. This revelation was both thrilling and troubling. If 9 Troys existed, which one was the Troy? Which layer held the truth behind Homer's epic? The more archaeologists studied the site, the murkier the picture became. The layer Schliemann called Troy II, the one that contained Priam's treasure, turned out to be at least 1,000 years older than the supposed date of the Trojan War. That meant the artifacts he celebrated didn't belong to Priam. Achilles, or Helen, they belonged to an earlier civilization entirely. To make matters worse, Schliemann had smuggled many of those treasures out of Turkey, violating agreements and international laws. Some accused him of being more of a treasure hunter than a scientist, a man chasing fame rather than truth. Still, even his critics couldn't deny that he had unearthed something monumental. Beneath the myths, there was indeed a city, ancient, powerful, and real. And although Schliemann might have misdated or misinterpreted his findings, his discovery ignited a spark that would lead to decades of serious archaeological study. Future researchers, armed with better tools and more discipline, returned to Hizarlik. They discovered that the layer known as Troy VI and Troy VII fit the description of Homer's city far more closely. Enormous stone walls, once rising high above the plains, matched the epic's vision of a city well-walled and proud. Arrowheads, burnt debris, and collapsed towers revealed that the city had met a violent end around 1200 BCE. Roughly the same time historians believed the Trojan War would have occurred, if it were real. It was a revelation that both vindicated and complicated Schliemann's dream. He had found Troy, but not in the way he imagined. The real story was more complex, layered like the ruins themselves. Troy wasn't a single moment frozen in time. It was a cycle of human ambition, greed, and survival. Cities rose and fell, empires fought for control, and each generation rebuilt on the ashes of the last. By the time Homer wrote the Iliad, he wasn't inventing a story. He was remembering one, passed down through centuries of oral tradition. The most haunting question, however, still lingers. Why was Troy destroyed? Was it truly because of a woman's abduction? A love story gone wrong? Or was that just a convenient fiction for a war fought over power and trade? The city's location near the Dardanelles made it a strategic prize, controlling access between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Whoever ruled Troy ruled the passage of wealth and influence between continents. Perhaps the Greeks didn't come for Helen at all. Perhaps they came for dominance, disguising ambition with poetry. As archaeologists pieced together more evidence, the myth began to fracture, but it didn't collapse. It evolved. The legend of Troy was no longer just a story about gods and heroes. It became a mirror reflecting human nature itself. Schliemann's discovery, flawed as it was, forced the world to confront a possibility that had been dismissed for centuries. Myths might not be entirely untrue. Beneath exaggeration and symbolism, there might be a heartbeat of reality. Even today, Troy remains an enigma, part history, part imagination. The walls stand as fragments of truth surrounded by centuries of storytelling. Schliemann's reckless ambition, once ridiculed, ultimately reignited humanity's fascination with the ancient world. He had dug too deeply, yes, but in doing so, he had exposed something larger than archaeology. He unearthed the human need to believe that every legend hides a trace of reality, that every myth begins with something that once was. The search for Troy didn't just uncover ruins. It revealed the blurred boundary between history and hope. And in that blur lies the mystery that still haunts every archaeologist who sets foot on his Zarlik, the quiet, unsettling question that refuses to fade. Did Troy truly fall? Or did we build it ourselves, brick by brick, out of our own need for meaning? Imagine a city so strategically placed that it could command the very lifeblood of the ancient world, trade. Troy was not merely a mythic kingdom. It was the beating heart of commerce between East and West. Every ship that sailed from the Aegean to the Black Sea passed its shores. Every caravan that carried goods from Asia to Europe crossed its shadow. Whoever controlled Troy controlled power. And in a world where kingdoms rose and fell on the weight of gold and grain, that power was worth going to war for. Yet, when the story reached us through Homer's Iliad, the reason for that war was not politics or wealth, but love. A woman named Helen, the most beautiful in the world, taken from her husband Menelaus by the Trojan prince Paris. 1,000 ships launched to bring her back. It was poetry, not politics. Emotion, not economy. But behind that lyrical tale, historians now believe, lies something much colder. The greed of men, the hunger for dominance, and the rewriting of truth to serve glory. The world of the late Bronze Age was not unlike ours in one crucial way. It revolved around control of resources. Cities like Mycenae, Hattusa, and Ugarit flourished through trade and alliances, and Troy sat like a gatekeeper between them. Archaeological studies show that Troy was large, fortified, and wealthy, its storage chambers overflowing with imported pottery, luxury items, and food reserves. Such wealth did not come without enemies. The Mycenaean Greeks, fierce seafarers and ambitious warriors, had their eyes set on expansion. And the easiest path to dominance was to seize Troy's position along the narrow Dardanelles Strait. To do that, they needed a reason, a justification that would echo through the ages. The abduction of Helen may have been that justification, or the cover story. The Iliad tells us that love sparked the war, but history suggests otherwise. Wars of such magnitude were rarely waged for emotion alone. They were waged for survival, control, and pride. The Greeks may have needed a tale that would glorify their actions, transforming their conquest from a campaign of greed into a story of honor. By turning a military invasion into an epic romance, they immortalized themselves not as aggressors, but as heroes avenging a sacred wrong. It was propaganda of the most enduring kind. The truth, however, is less romantic. The archaeological layers of Troy tell a story written not in verse, but in ash. Excavations reveal that the city was burned to the ground around 1200 BCE. Charred stones, arrowheads embedded in the walls, and the remains of collapsed towers suggest a violent siege. But who attacked and why remains a riddle. Some evidence points to an outside force, the Mycenaeans, or perhaps a confederation of Aegean powers. Others suspect internal rebellion, a civil war sparked by the collapse of trade networks and political instability sweeping across the ancient world at that time. The late Bronze Age was an era of chaos. Empires fell like dominoes, one after another, as famine, earthquakes, and invasions tore through the region. Troy might have simply been another casualty of a world unraveling, yet what makes the Trojan War so fascinating is not whether it happened exactly as Homer described, but how it became a moral epic that shaped human imagination for centuries. The story of Troy was never just about battle. It was about human nature, pride, betrayal, ambition. Achilles, the mightiest warrior, was not fighting for justice. He was fighting for his name, for his own legend. Hector, Troy's noble defender, fought not to win, but to preserve dignity in the face of certain doom. Even Helen, so often blamed for it all, became a symbol of the cost of beauty, the burden of desire, the fragility of peace. In each of them, we see reflections of ourselves, flawed, conflicted, desperate to find meaning in chaos. The more we study Troy, the more we realize that the Iliad may have preserved something deeper than historical fact. It preserved emotional truth. Beneath the gods and heroes lies a portrait of humanity's oldest pattern, to destroy what it cannot control. The Greeks did not need to invent gods to explain why Troy fell. They only needed to understand their own pride. Every hero in the story is driven by ego. Agamemnon's arrogance, Achilles' rage, Paris' selfishness. Each action, small or great, leads to catastrophe. Perhaps the real power of Troy's story lies not in its truth, but in its warning. Still, the archaeological evidence insists that something catastrophic took place. The layer known as Troy Sevena, the most likely candidate for Homer's city, bears the unmistakable marks of siege warfare. Storage jars filled to the brim suggest that the inhabitants were stockpiling food, expecting a long conflict. Skeletons found buried hastily, some still clutching weapons, tell of sudden death. The city's outer defenses were breached, its towers toppled, its people massacred or enslaved. This was no mere mythic event. It was the violent end of a thriving civilization. And in the centuries that followed, survivors or neighboring peoples must have carried fragments of that story. Whispers of a great city that burned, of warriors who fought and fell, of kings who defied destiny, until those whispers became songs, and those songs became Homer's immortal verse. But what of the famous wooden horse, the ultimate symbol of cunning and betrayal? No archaeological trace of it has ever been found, nor any mention of it in early records. The story of the horse may have been a later addition, a metaphor crafted to represent deception, or perhaps even a memory of how the city truly fell. Some scholars believe the horse was not a literal construct, but a reference to an earthquake or siege engine, something misunderstood and later romanticized. Others see it as pure invention, a narrative device designed to give the Greeks divine cleverness rather than brute cruelty. Whatever the case, the image of the wooden horse has endured because it captures something timeless. The idea that the greatest downfall often comes not from strength, but from trust misplaced. As time passed, the Trojan War grew beyond history, beyond archaeology, beyond even Homer. It became a foundation for Western storytelling, the origin of our fascination with tragedy, heroism, and the blurred line between glory and ruin. Artists painted it, playwrights dramatized it, philosophers quoted it. And through it all, Troy remained both real and unreal, both a place and an idea. The more scholars tried to strip it of myth, the more powerful the myth became. Modern historians and archaeologists continue to debate the truth. Some see Troy as the first recorded clash between East and West, an echo of cultural tension that still defines human history. Others view it as a timeless allegory, a story about what happens when pride blinds nations. Either way, the war for Troy was not fought once. It has been fought over and over again. Each time humans repeat the same mistakes. Each time we let desire disguise itself as destiny. Perhaps that is the ultimate truth behind the Trojan War. It was never about Helen. It was never about gods or divine fate. It was about humanity's hunger for power and immortality. The Greeks may have razed Troy, but in doing so, they ensured its eternal life. The city they sought to destroy became immortal in the very act of its destruction. Rebuilt in memory, in story, in art, and thousands of years later, we still speak its name. Troy endures not because of its ruins, but because it represents the eternal struggle between what we want and what it costs to have it. It stands as a warning that love, when used as a banner for conquest, becomes a lie. That glory built on destruction never lasts, and that behind every legend of victory lies a quieter, darker truth, that every empire, every hero, and every civilization eventually meets its own burning walls. And so, when we ask if the war for Troy was real, perhaps we are asking the wrong question. Maybe it doesn't matter whether it happened exactly as told. What matters is that it could have, and that, in one form or another, it still does. Today, the wind still sweeps across the hill of Hisarlik, carrying with it the scent of ancient dust and the whispers of forgotten empires. The stones that remain are silent, yet their silence speaks louder than any legend. They are the bones of Troy, a city that once stood tall and proud, a city that lived, burned, and was reborn countless times. Centuries may have buried its grandeur, but not its story. The ground itself seems to remember. Each layer of earth hides traces of triumph and tragedy, of civilization rising from ashes only to crumble again. Troy's ruins are not just remnants of stone. They are a mirror of humanity's endless cycle of ambition, glory, and loss. Archaeologists have spent generations trying to unravel the truth of this place, peeling back the layers of myth to find the reality beneath. What they have found is a revelation both humbling and haunting. Troy was never a single city. It was a succession of cities, built and rebuilt by different people across more than 3,000 years. Each new Troy rose upon the ruins of the last, as though every generation refused to surrender the dream of its greatness. The ruins we see today are the sum of that stubborn endurance, the physical embodiment of humanity's refusal to forget. The legacy of Troy is not confined to its ruins. It lives in the stories we tell about ourselves. Every culture, in one way or another, has its own Troy, a city of hope and pride that fell because of human flaws. Whether it's an empire consumed by ambition or a dream undone by betrayal, Troy is the eternal metaphor for what it means to be human. Its legend endures not because of what it reveals about the past, but because of what it reveals about us. And perhaps that is the truest lesson of Troy. History fades, civilizations crumble, but stories endure. They evolve, twist, and transform, carrying fragments of truth through time. Troy, in all its ruins and retellings, reminds us that even when the world forgets, memory finds a way to survive. The city may be gone, but the idea of it, the defiance, the tragedy, the longing, remains immortal. When we look at the broken stones on the plains of Hisarlik, we are not just looking at the past. We are looking at the reflection of our own civilization, built high, full of promise, fragile in its pride. The ruins whisper that every age believes itself unshakable, and every age falls. But through those falls, humanity continues to tell its stories, hoping that by remembering the old ones, it might learn to prevent the next. Troy stands as more than an archaeological site. It is a symbol of endurance, proof that even after fire and ruin, something remains. Its myth, its memory, its message. We will never know with certainty how much of the legend was real, but perhaps that is not the point. The power of Troy lies not in what can be measured, but in what can be imagined. And as long as we continue to tell its story, as long as the name Troy is spoken with awe, the city will never truly fall, because Troy, like truth itself, can never be buried forever. It sleeps beneath the earth, waiting for us to listen, waiting for us to remember. And maybe, somewhere deep down, we know. We are all living in our own Troys, building empires of pride, chasing dreams that may one day burn, but hoping, always. Hoping that what rises from the ashes will outlast us all. In the end, Troy remains an echo, a name that refuses to die, a mystery that no empire, scholar, or century has ever fully silenced. Beneath its ruins lies the heartbeat of every civilization that rose and fell after it, whispering that history is never as far from legend as we believe. The ashes of Troy remind us that truth, like fire, always leaves its mark. And somewhere beyond those ancient walls, another secret waits to be uncovered. Because if Troy still hides its truth beneath the earth, what other myths of our past might still be alive beneath the dust of time?